Picture this, a colossal army, one of the largest ever assembled in human history, marching with unwavering confidence. Their mission? To crush a small but defiant kingdom and bring it to heel. This was the scene in 612 AD, as the mighty Sui Dynasty of China, under the command of the ambitious Emperor Yang, set its sights on Goguryeo, a kingdom in ancient Korea. This wasn't just any invasion, it was a spectacle of power, a million-strong force meant to shock and awe the world. But what was meant to be a swift, decisive victory would soon unravel into one of the most catastrophic military disasters in history, a story of hubris, resilience, and a battle that would seal the fate of an empire. Today, we're diving deep into the disastrous Sui invasion of Goguryeo and the pivotal Battle of Salsa River. So why did Emperor Yang risk everything on this massive campaign? The roots of the conflict go back to the complex geopolitics of 6th and 7th century East Asia. The Sui dynasty had recently reunified China after centuries of division, and Emperor Yang was eager to project his empire's restored power. He saw himself as the rightful ruler of all under heaven, and any kingdom that didn't bow to his authority was a direct challenge. Goguryeo was one such kingdom. Fiercely independent and militarily formidable, Goguryeo controlled a strategic territory covering modern-day northern Korea and parts of Manchuria. They weren't just some minor nuisance, they were a regional power in their own right. Goguryeo had also been making alliances with the Eastern Turkic Khaganate, another major rival to the Sui. From Emperor Yang's perspective, Goguryeo was a thorn in his side, a rogue state that needed to be brought into the fold, one way or another. So, in 611, he issued the order and began preparations for an invasion on a scale the world had never seen. The numbers alone are staggering. Ancient texts, like the Book of Sui, claim the total force numbered over 1 million combat troops, with a support and logistics train of potentially double that number. Imagine a column of soldiers and supply wagons so long that it took 40 days for the first and last units to leave the main assembly point. This wasn't just an army, it was a moving city. The land army marched east, while a massive fleet was prepared to attack the Goguryeo capital, Pyongyang, from the sea. Emperor Yang was so confident that he believed the mere sight of his army would cause Goguryeo to surrender without a fight. He had meticulously planned every detail, from the supply lines to the multi-pronged attack. The plan seemed foolproof. On one side, the land army would push through Goguryeo's northern defenses. On the other, the navy would land troops near Pyongyang and take the capital. A classic pincer movement. What could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turns out, pretty much everything. The first obstacle for the Sui army was the formidable Liaodong fortress, a key defensive stronghold in western Goguryeo. The Sui generals, expecting a quick siege, threw wave after wave of soldiers at its walls. But the Goguryeo defenders were tenacious. They fought back with incredible determination, repelling every assault. Weeks turned into months, and the great Sui army was stuck, bogged down at the very first hurdle. The siege of Liaodong became a bloody stalemate, draining Sui resources and, more importantly, morale. The weather turned against them, with heavy rains turning the siege camps into a sea of mud. Disease began to spread. The seemingly invincible Sui war machine was grinding to a halt. Emperor Yang, growing increasingly impatient from his command post, watched as his grand strategy began to crumble. His generals were frustrated, and the soldiers were exhausted. While the main army was stuck at Liaodong, a separate elite force of 305,000 soldiers was dispatched with a daring objective: bypass the fortresses and make a direct dash for the capital, Pyongyang. This was the knockout blow, the move designed to end the war quickly. They carried limited rations, expecting to capture Goguryeo cities and resupply along the way. This decision would prove to be a fatal miscalculation. Leading the Goguryeo forces was the brilliant general Yulji Mundiak. He understood he couldn't defeat the massive Sui army in a head-on confrontation. So, he employed a masterful strategy of deception and attrition. As the 300,000-strong Sui force advanced, they found a seemingly deserted countryside. Uljimundiok's forces would engage in small skirmishes, feigning defeat and retreating every time, luring the Sui army deeper and deeper into Goguryeo territory. The Sui soldiers, overconfident and eager for a decisive battle, fell for the trap completely. They chased the retreating Goguryeo forces, marching further and further from their supply lines. With each victory, they grew more exhausted and their rations dwindled. The Goguryeo soldiers, meanwhile, were fresh and fighting on their home turf. General Uljimundiok even sent a fake surrender letter to the Sui camp, further boosting their arrogance. In the letter, he deliberately praised their military might, suggesting that if they would just withdraw, his king would personally escort Emperor Yang back. The Sui commanders, believing victory was within their grasp, ignored the warning signs and pushed on toward Pyongyang. They were walking straight into one of the most brilliantly laid traps in military history. By the time the Sui army reached the outskirts of Pyongyang, they were a shadow of their former selves. They were starving, exhausted from the constant marching and skirmishes, and utterly demoralized. The city's defenses were far stronger than they anticipated, and the Goguryeo garrison was well prepared. Seeing the pitiful state of the Sui army, General Uljimundiok knew the time was right. He sent a poem to the Sui commander, which on the surface sounded like praise, but was actually a taunt. It basically said, "Your achievements are already legendary, you've won. Why not just be satisfied and go home?" It was the ultimate psychological blow. The Sui commanders finally realized the depth of their predicament. They had been completely outmaneuvered. With no hope of taking the capital and their supplies gone, they had only one option left: to retreat. And this is where the story reaches its dramatic climax, at a place called the Salsu River. In modern-day Korea, it's known as the Changshin River. Uljimundiok had anticipated the Sui retreat route. In the days leading up to it, he had his men build a dam upstream, holding back the river's water. As the desperate and starving Sui army began to cross the shallow river, it was the moment he had been waiting for. The dam was broken. A tremendous wall of water surged down the riverbed, smashing into the unsuspecting Sui soldiers. Thousands were swept away and drowned in an instant. The army, already in disarray, descended into absolute panic. And that's when the Goguryeo forces, who had been hiding in ambush, attacked from all sides. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. The exhausted Sui soldiers had no chance. They were cut down as they tried to flee the torrent of water and the relentless Goguryeo cavalry. The scale of the disaster was almost unimaginable. Of the 305,000 elite soldiers who had crossed into Goguryeo territory, historical accounts claim that only 2,700 made it back to China alive. Let that sink in. Over 300,000 men, the cream of the Sui army, were wiped out in a single campaign. The Battle of Salsu River is remembered as one of the most lethal battles in world history, a testament to the brilliance of General Uljimundiok and the resilience of the Goguryeo people. When news of the defeat reached Emperor Yang, he was furious and humiliated. The loss was not just military, it was a devastating blow to his prestige and the authority of the Sui dynasty. The fallout from this catastrophic failure was immense. Emperor Yang, obsessed with revenge, would launch two more invasions of Goguryeo in the following years. Both would also end in failure, further draining the empire's treasury and manpower. The massive cost of these wars, coupled with the emperor's extravagant construction projects like the Grand Canal, pushed the people to their breaking point. Widespread rebellions erupted across China. The mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule, was clearly lost. In 618 AD, just a few years after the Salsu River disaster, Emperor Yang was assassinated by his own generals. The mighty Sui Dynasty, which had reunified China and seemed poised for greatness, collapsed after only 37 years. It was a stunningly rapid fall from grace, and the disastrous Korean campaigns were a primary cause. The dynasty that rose from its ashes, the Tang, would go on to become one of the golden ages of Chinese history, but they learned a valuable lesson from the Sui's failure. The Battle of Salsu River is more than just a historical event, it's a timeless lesson in strategy, hubris, and the power of resistance. It shows how a smaller, determined force can defeat a seemingly invincible giant through clever tactics, psychological warfare, and an unbreakable will to defend their homeland. General Yulji Mundiak is celebrated as one of the greatest military heroes in Korean history, a symbol of national defiance. For the Sui Dynasty, it was the beginning of the end, a self-inflicted wound from which it would never recover. It serves as a stark reminder that no empire, no matter how powerful, is immune to overconfidence and a fatal underestimation of its opponent. What an incredible story of David versus Goliath on a geopolitical scale. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to ancient East Asia. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most dramatic moments. Let me know in the comments what other historical battles you'd like to see covered. Until next time, stay curious.